Before we begin, do you enjoy listening to our show? Consider subscribing on your preferred podcast platform or supporting us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Link is in the show notes. I'm Harper Finley, and this is Night Watch Files. On February 13th, 2017, an unusually warm winter day provided a perfect backdrop for an impromptu hike, particularly since Delphi Community Middle School in Indiana had canceled classes that Monday to balance out unused snow days. The morning began leisurely for 14-year-old Libby German and her best friend, 13-year-old Abigail Abby Williams, who were recovering from a Sunday night sleepover at Libby's home. The evening prior, the girls had stayed up late eating pizza and garlic knots, watching a scary movie, and messaging boys on social media. When they finally woke up, Libby's father, Derrick, prepared them a breakfast of banana pancakes. Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, was working in her home appraisal office located in the family's garage when the girls asked for permission to go to a hike at the trails. Although Libby did not mention her specific intention to cross the towering Monon High Bridge, Becky agreed to the outing, stipulating only that the girls needed reliable transportation to and from the hiking spot. Libby secured a ride from her sister, Kelsi, and her father, Derrick, agreed to pick the girls up 2 hours later. As the teenagers scrambled to leave, Becky reminded her granddaughter that despite the sunshine, the February air would still be chilly and she needed to take a jacket. Pausing in the doorframe, Libby offered her grandmother a final reassurance, stating, "Grandma, it'll be okay." The girls piled into Kelsi's car equipped for the weather. Libby brought along her new black swim team sweatshirt, and Kelsi loaned Abby a gray sweatshirt. With the song Heathens by 21 Pilots droning on the radio, Libby snapped a selfie in the back seat. At 1:38 p.m., Kelsi pulled up to the Mears entrance of the trails, where Abby and Libby jumped out of the car and disappeared into the trees. Abby and Libby were inseparable, bonded by a friendship where opposites seamlessly attracted. Abby, a 13-year-old only child, was known for her shy and quiet demeanor. She lived with her single mother, Anna Williams, who juggled 2 jobs, including part-time work at a local restaurant to support her daughter and their beloved cat, Bongo. In contrast, 14-year-old Libby was outgoing, garrulous, and fiercely protective. Libby lived on the outskirts of the small town of Delphi, Indiana, in a bustling, multi-generational household under the primary care of her grandparents, Mike and Becky Patty. Also living in the home were Libby's older sister, Kelsi, and her father, Derrick, who had overcome past struggles with addiction to focus on raising his daughters. Becky ran a home appraisal business out of the family's garage, a space adorned with markings of the girls' heights as they grew. The 2 girls first crossed paths in the 6th grade, finding themselves continually placed in the same academic circles, after-school programs, and sports teams. Their structural alignment in school quickly blossomed into a profound friendship rooted in a wide array of shared passions. Both teenagers loved the outdoors, frequently spending their leisure time hiking, biking, and fishing along local trail networks. They nurtured a mutual love for the arts, expressing their creativity through photography, making handmade crafts, and playing the saxophone side by side in their middle school band for 3 years. Despite their youth, both girls were remarkably ambitious and academically advanced. Libby, who enjoyed baking cookies for her family and leaving encouraging notes for friends, was already enrolled in science courses at Purdue University with dreams of becoming a science teacher. Abby harbored a deep fascination with true crime, criminology, and forensic science, aspiring to one day become a law enforcement officer. Within their peer group, Libby naturally assumed the role of the therapist, always ready to offer advice or stand up for anyone facing unfair treatment or bullying. Abby was more reserved, but she found a steadfast anchor in Libby. Their dynamic was perfectly complementary. As those close to them noted, where Libby went, Abby followed, and vice versa. Their connection was so deep that Abby was considered more of a sister to Libby than just a friend, and Libby's family even brought Abby along on a spring break vacation to Florida. Because Abby was not yet allowed to have her own cell phone, Libby thoughtfully added her best friend's fingerprints to her iPhone so Abby could use it with ease. Teachers at their middle school knew that calling for one girl would inevitably summon the other. In February 2017, the residents of Delphi experienced an unseasonably warm winter, which meant the school district's predetermined snow days had gone unused. Because the administration was required to observe these accumulated days off, students at Delphi Community Middle School were given an extra long weekend that began on Thursday, February 9th, with classes not scheduled to resume until Tuesday, February 14th. On the second to last day of this short winter break, Abby packed her belongings for a sleepover at Libby's. On the afternoon of Sunday, February 12th, the girls took advantage of the mild weather by spending time in Libby's backyard, practicing their swings in preparation for the upcoming spring softball season, a sport Libby had recently convinced Abby to join. As evening fell, the girls moved the fun indoors and were allowed to stay up late, despite it being a Sunday night. They spent part of the evening hanging out with Libby's older sister, Kelsi, and her friends, sharing a meal of pizza and garlic knots. The best friends emptied Abby's craft box onto Libby's bedroom floor to work on a watercolor painting together, watched a scary movie, filmed themselves engaging in silly antics, and used social media to chat with boys. After sleeping in late, the teenagers woke up on the morning of Monday, February 13th, and enjoyed a breakfast of banana pancakes prepared by Libby's father, Derrick. Because the warm weather persisted, the girls wanted to make the most of their day off by spending the afternoon taking photographs and hiking along the local trails. The decision for the outing took shape while Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, was working in her home appraisal office located in the family's garage. Initially, Becky had offered the 8th graders a bargain. If they helped her file paperwork, she would pay them for their labor, and the 3 of them could use the earnings to go clothes shopping later that afternoon. However, Libby had other ideas and asked her grandmother if she and Abby could go to the trails instead. Although Libby did not mention her specific intention to cross the towering Monon High Bridge, Becky agreed to the outing, stipulating only that the girls needed to secure reliable transportation to and from the hiking spot. The logistics quickly fell into place when Libby's older sister, Kelsi, entered the garage and announced she was heading out to see her boyfriend and go to work. The girls had requested a trip to the trails multiple times during the preceding week, but Kelsi had been unable to accommodate them. Around noon, they once again asked Kelsi for a ride, and since she was already planning to drive past the area to visit her boyfriend, she finally agreed to drop them off for their hike. Prompted by her grandmother to arrange a ride home, Libby then called her father, who was driving toward Frankfurt to photograph houses for the family business. Derrick agreed to pick the girls up at the trails in approximately 2 hours, noting that he would call or text Libby when he was close to the trailhead so they could meet him. At approximately 1:49 p.m., on the mild afternoon of February 13, 2017, Kelsi German dropped the 2 teenagers off across from the Mears farm entrance to the local hiking trails. Kelsi watched from her car as her sister and Abby proceeded into the trailhead of the Mary Gerard Nature Preserve until they disappeared from her line of sight. The girls set out along the Monon High Bridge trail, following a flat, spacious path made of crushed stone that was as wide as a small road. Framed by barren winter trees and dry, fallen leaves, the trail offered a leisurely and scenic hike. During these early moments of their excursion, Abby and Libby spent their time laughing, talking, and taking photographs to document their adventure. As they strolled toward the abandoned 853-foot-long railroad trestle, a fellow hiker passing by noticed the 2 best friends chatting quietly and intimately with one another. Libby actively documented the hike by uploading pictures to her Snapchat account. At 2:05 p.m., just moments before they stepped onto the decaying wooden planks, Libby posted an artistic photograph of the Monon High Bridge stretching out into the far distance. The stark filter she applied to the image made the old bridge's wooden ties appear ghostly pale. 2 minutes later, at 2:07 p.m., Libby uploaded a candid photograph of Abby walking across the rickety bridge toward her. In the image, Abby was captured mid-step with her head slightly lowered, wearing blue jeans, black sneakers, and a burgundy top beneath the gray sweatshirt she had borrowed from Libby, keeping her hands tucked casually into her pockets. After that final image was uploaded, all communication from the girls abruptly ceased. Derrick German was scheduled to pick the girls up, and at 3:11 p.m., he sent a text message to let Libby know he was arriving. When he pulled into the trailhead parking area at 3:13 or 3:14 p.m., the girls were nowhere to be found. After waiting a few minutes, Derrick called his daughter's cell phone, but his calls went unanswered, a detail that immediately raised alarms, as Libby was known to always answer calls from her family. Derrick began walking the trails himself, asking another hiker if he had seen the girls, but turned up nothing. At 3:30 p.m., a concerned Derrick phoned Libby's grandmother, Becky, asking if there had been some sort of miscommunication, and the girls had already caught a ride home. When Becky confirmed the girls were not at the house, the family's worry began to mobilize into a frantic search effort. Becky quickly reached out to the girls' friends and Libby's older sister, Kelsi, but no one had heard from them since the Snapchat posts. By 4:20 p.m., Becky called her husband, Mike Patty, at work, prompting him to abruptly leave and rush to the trails, while Libby's uncle also joined the gathering family search party. By 5 p.m., the family was dispersed throughout the woods, desperately calling out the girls' names. Kelsi and her uncle even crossed the terrifying height of the Monon High Bridge, venturing down the hill and knocking on the doors of nearby residences in a desperate bid for information. Meanwhile, Derrick continuously dialed Libby's number until the phone eventually died or was turned off, sending his calls straight to voicemail. In a frantic attempt to locate them, Becky tried to use a Find My Phone application, but the effort failed because Libby had recently factory reset her device due to a software glitch. Becky even pleaded with AT&T customer service for help tracking the phone's location, but the representative explained they could not legally ping the device without a downloaded app. Despite the mounting terror, the families initially clung to innocent explanations, hoping the teenagers had merely lost track of time, dropped the cell phone, or sustained a minor injury that left them stuck in the woods. When Becky finally reached Abby's mother, Anna Williams, at her workplace to deliver the news, Anna was frustrated rather than terrified, anticipating she would have to give her daughter a stern lecture for being irresponsible. However, as the sun began to set and the woods grew dark with still no sign of the girls, the reality of the situation set in, and the family officially reported Abby and Libby missing to the police around 5:30 p.m. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Police dispatch alerted Deputy Mitch Catron of the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, who was nearing the end of his day shift when he received the call and immediately drove his cruiser to North 625 West. After parking beneath the Monon High Bridge, Catron drove up to the nearby residence of Brad Weber to notify him of the missing girls and secure permission to search his wooded property, though the dimming light and dense trees severely limited visibility. Meanwhile, Delphi Police Chief Steve Mullen had already clocked out for the day, but upon hearing the radio call, he returned to the sheriff's office and began contacting school officials to compile a list of the girls' friends, initially suspecting they might have simply lost track of time or gotten injured. As the sun set, the law enforcement response rapidly escalated. Carroll County Sheriff Tobe Lazenby, and Delphi Fire Department Chief Daryl Sterrett spearheaded a mobilization of local deputies, firefighters, and Department of Natural Resources officers. Detective Tony Liggett, who had been busy booking a suspect at the station, joined the effort by researching Abby's address and driving to her home, finding it empty. Law enforcement instructed the families to gather at the police station to file formal missing persons reports and hand over crucial information. Mike Patty, Libby's grandfather, made a trip back to his house to gather Libby's remaining electronics, including iPads and computers, for police review. Investigators also spoke at length with Libby's sister, Kelsi, who provided them with the final Snapchat photos Libby had posted of the bridge, establishing a timeline that indicated everything was fine as late as 2:07 p.m. Throughout the evening, a massive search operation blanketed the trails, utilizing drones overhead and a growing legion of civilian volunteers scouring the woods with flashlights. Despite the intense effort, authorities made the difficult decision to officially suspend the search around midnight due to safety and liability concerns over navigating the rugged, dark terrain, though many civilians and first responders continued looking on their own into the early morning hours. By mid-morning on Valentine's Day, the official search resumed with a surge of public volunteers and the arrival of news media. The investigation expanded significantly when First Sergeant Jerry Holman of the Indiana State Police caught wind of the missing juveniles and dispatched himself, Sergeant Steve Buckley, and Detective Jay Harper to Delphi. At the crowded Delphi fire station, the state troopers met with county detectives Kevin Hammond and Tony Liggett, who expressed frustration over public backlash for failing to issue an Amber Alert. The county detectives explained that the disappearance did not meet the strict legal criteria for the alert since there was no definitive evidence of an abduction, prompting Holman to offer assistance through the Indiana Intelligence Fusion Center to broadcast a broader notice. As the ground search intensified, an Indiana State Police helicopter took flight, hovering over the bare trees of the Delphi woods in a desperate bid to locate the two missing teenagers. Dozens of volunteers and first responders received their grid assignments and fanned out across the rugged terrain. The first notable breakthrough in the harrowing search came from Jake Johns and Shane Haygood, two volunteer searchers who had spent 4 hours walking upstream along the banks of Deer Creek. As the men emerged from beneath the looming Monon High Bridge, they spotted bright flashes of yellow, orange, pink, and blue in the water. Tangled in the reeds of the creek was a sodden, tie-dyed shirt, and resting nearby was a single black Nike tennis shoe. Word of the discovered garments quickly carried through the quiet woods, reaching other search parties nearby. Libby's older sister, Kelsi, who was searching along the trail just below the bridge, heard the shouts and confirmed to the other searchers that the shoe matched the black Nikes her sister had been wearing. Because they were wearing ankle-high boots and could not wade into the waist-deep water, Haygood and Johns shouted to a nearby firefighter and placed a call to another searcher, Pat Brown, who was scouring the opposite side of the creek near the local cemetery. As Brown and his group made their way down the hill toward the creek to investigate the discovery, they stepped into a shallow depression near the water's edge. About 5 feet away, Brown spotted pale skin resting against the bed of fallen winter leaves. For a fleeting moment, the chilling sight confused him, and he thought he had stumbled upon discarded mannequins left on the forest floor. Then he saw the blood. "We found them," Brown's voice echoed through the bare trees, carrying over to the searchers standing on the opposite bank. Beside him, a sobbing Melissa, the sister of Libby's grandmother, Becky, fled from the horrific scene while Brown stood vigil with his back to the girls, determined to ensure no one else got too close to the crime scene. He pulled out his phone and dialed Delphi Police Chief Steve Mullen, officially transforming the massive rescue mission into a double homicide investigation. As a coroner's van arrived near the woods, murmurs of the discovery spread rapidly through the wandering bands of volunteers, and law enforcement quietly began ordering the devastated civilian searchers to go home. The discovery of the bodies brought a specialized team of crime scene investigators to the rugged banks of Deer Creek to process the horrifying aftermath. Sergeant Brian O'Leahy, the lead crime scene investigator at the Lafayette Post, arrived and quickly realized the steep, wooded terrain would require investigators to descend a massive slope on foot. Joined by Sergeants Jason Page and Dwayne Datzman, the team established a safe path to the bodies, marking it with yellow rope to preserve potential evidence and dubbing the immediate area Ground Zero. The scene they encountered was disturbing. Liberty German lay naked beneath a tree, her body covered in blood, with branches and sticks deliberately laid across her torso. Abigail Williams was found nearby, fully clothed but redressed in her best friend's oversized sweatshirt and unzipped jeans, her hands resting on her chest. Both victims were stiff in a state of full rigor, having suffered deep fatal lacerations to their necks. A nearby tree bore a distinct smear of blood, and a faint trail in the leaves indicated Libby had been dragged by her left wrist. While Datzman photographed the scene in a spiral pattern and Page sketched detailed diagrams, the use of an alternative light source revealed a glittering piece of evidence hidden in the fallen leaves. Pressed slightly into the earth between the two girls was an intact, unspent .40 caliber cartridge. Later, as investigators carefully rolled Abby's rigged body over to search beneath her, O'Leahy reached into a dark spot on the ground and pulled out a cell phone belonging to Libby. The task of determining exactly what happened to the teenage girls fell to forensic pathologist Dr. Roland Kaur at the Terre Haute Regional Hospital. Abby's autopsy revealed a single 2-inch long and 1-inch deep cut to the left side of her neck that partially severed her jugular vein. Because the bleeding was slow, Kaur determined she likely held on for 5 to 10 minutes before dying. Though she bore no defensive wounds, her arms were frozen in a pugilistic attitude due to rigor mortis, and Kaur noted 2 faint lines across her face, resembling the edges of duct tape applied around the time of her death. Yet there was no adhesive residue left behind. Libby's injuries were far more brutal, featuring 4 or 5 overlapping incisions across her throat that completely severed both carotid arteries and her left jugular vein. Abrasions indicated the killer had violently drawn the blade back and forth across her neck multiple times, and the resulting cerebral edema suggested she also survived for 5 to 10 minutes with her throat cut. Kaur was puzzled by Libby's wounds, noting they had an unusual serrated-like pattern that resembled the handle area of a blade rather than a classic saw-like edge. Notably, neither girl showed signs of sexual assault, though Kaur carefully collected sexual assault kits for DNA analysts to examine. DNA analyst Stacy Bozanovsky meticulously processed the victim's clothing and the kits, but the forensic results were frustratingly sparse. The creek water and the sheer volume of the victim's blood had degraded much of the evidence. Ultimately, Bozanovsky found no definitive offender DNA profile, discovering only a microscopic trace of unidentifiable male DNA and a rootless strand of hair that was later matched to German's older sister, Kelsi. Concurrently, forensic firearms examiner Melissa Oberg evaluated the unspent .40 caliber Smith & Wesson cartridge recovered from the earth between the victims. Noting distinct extractor and ejector marks on the ammunition, Oberg preserved the cartridge with the hope of eventually comparing its microscopic striations against a suspect's firearm. Following the autopsies, Becky Patty volunteered to formally identify the victims so the girls' mothers and grandmothers could remember them as they were in life. Upon viewing photographs provided by the coroner's office, Patty confirmed the bodies belonged to his granddaughter and her best friend. That same afternoon, Carroll County Sheriff Toby Lazenby and Indiana State Police Public Information Officer Kim Riley held a press conference to officially announce that the bodies found in the woods belonged to the missing teenagers. When eager journalists pressed authorities for details on the causes of death, law enforcement maintained a strict silence. Withholding the gruesome details of the autopsies was a deliberate, strategic choice designed to help investigators quickly weed out the inevitable false confessions from disturbed individuals seeking attention. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Behind the scenes, authorities recognized the massive scale of the investigation and formed Unified Command, a centralized group of stakeholders from local, county, state, and federal agencies tasked with steering the case. This coalition, which included the FBI, Indiana State Police, Carroll County Sheriff's Office, Delphi Police, and local prosecutors, initially convened in the city council room before moving to a larger space to accommodate the flood of incoming tips and digital extraction equipment. The most critical breakthrough for Unified Command came when digital forensic examiner Sergeant Brian Bunner successfully unlocked Libby's recovered cell phone. Upon accessing the phone, investigators made a chilling discovery. Facing a terrifying situation, Libby captured 43 seconds of video and audio. The shaky, jerky footage showed a man dressed in a blue jacket, walking with his head down as he moved rapidly across the Monon High Bridge toward the two teenagers. The audio laid bare the girl's escalating fear. Libby was recorded whispering, "That be a gun," followed by the metallic click of a firearm racking. The gruff voice of the approaching man was then captured giving a terrifying command, "Down the hill." Shortly after this interaction, the phone's logs recorded an unsuccessful attempt to unlock the device with a fingerprint at 2:14 p.m. Digital forensic experts, including Indiana State Police Sergeant Chris Sissel and examiner Stacy Eldridge, conducted deep extractions of the device to establish a definitive timeline of the murders. Data from the Apple Health app revealed that the last time Libby's phone logged any physical movement was at 2:39 p.m. on the day of the killings. The digital trail also presented several puzzling anomalies during the hours the girls were missing. Data extracted from the phone suggested that a headphone was plugged into the audio jack at 5:45 p.m. that evening, seconds after the phone received a call, and remained plugged in for nearly 5 hours. The device later lost its cellular connection at 10:32 p.m., only to reconnect to a tower at 4:33 a.m. the following morning, at which point it received a flood of delayed text messages. Unfortunately, because an examiner shut the phone down on February 15th to process it, the device's power log was permanently reset, making it impossible for investigators to ever determine exactly when the phone had originally powered off. Recognizing the sheer bravery of the girls, with Libby recording the terrifying encounter and Abby managing to conceal the phone with her body, authorities realized they possessed a direct, undeniable recording of the perpetrator and released a blurred screenshot of the suspect to the media on the evening of February 15th, framing him merely as a witness they wanted to speak to in hopes of not sending the killer, who they dubbed Bridge Guy, running. Just days into the investigation, a tipster call directed authorities to Brad Holder, claiming he was a white supremacist with a disturbing digital footprint. Investigators were particularly interested in Holder because his teenage son, Logan, was friendly with Abigail Williams, and Holder's Facebook account featured images associated with Asatru, an exclusionary, white supremacist offshoot of Norse paganism. These online posts included pictures of his own hand-carved runes and an eerie image of two women lying covered in branches on a forest floor. On February 17th, Holder sat down with FBI Special Agent Adam Pohl and Sergeant Christopher Gutti at the Delphi Police Department, where he openly admitted his son's connection to Abby and willingly cooperated with the police. However, the interview quickly cleared him as a suspect when he provided a solid alibi. Holder had been working at Waste Management in Buffalo, Indiana, over a half-hour away, and had clocked out after 2 p.m. before checking into a Logansport gym. Since the girls were abducted at 2:13 p.m., investigators realized it was impossible for Holder to have committed the crime. Meanwhile, investigators also sat down with Betsy Blair after the local woman promptly came forward to report what she had witnessed while walking the Delphi trails for exercise on the day of the murders. Blair revealed to police that she had seen a man standing on the Monon High Bridge from about 50 feet away, whom she confidently identified as the suspect captured in Liberty German's video. She described him as a white man around 20 years old with curly brown hair and a medium build, providing the details for an official composite sketch. Blair also recalled that as she turned back toward her car, she passed Williams and German heading toward the bridge. Aside from the killer, she was likely the last person to see the teenagers alive. On February 16, 2017, a local CVS shift manager named Richard Allen called the Delphi tip line to report that he had been on the trails on the day of the murders, a decision prompted by his wife mentioning that police were seeking information from anyone in the area. 2 days later, Department of Natural Resources Lieutenant Dan Doolin picked up the unassigned lead sheet and arranged to meet the shift manager in the parking lot of a local Save-A-Lot grocery store. During the brief 10-minute interview, Allen admitted he had been on the trails from roughly 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m., claimed he had parked his vehicle at a non-existent old Farm Bureau building, and noted he had seen 3 girls, including one with dark hair, while he was distracted by a stock ticker on his phone. Doolin dutifully recorded the information and marked the lead as requiring further follow-up. While desperately searching for the missing teenagers, Libby German's older sister reached out to her recent social media contacts, including an Instagram and Snapchat profile under the handle @AnthonyShots. When investigators later scoured Libby's online activity, the @AnthonyShots account immediately stood out as a fake profile designed to lure teenage girls. The profile featured stolen images of a handsome male model, which the user leveraged to entice young girls into sending nude photographs and their home addresses. Following the murders, the user behind the account even messaged one of Libby's friends, feigning shock over the deaths and claiming that he and Libby were supposed to meet up but she never arrived. By subpoenaing records from social media companies and Comcast, detectives traced the account's IP addresses to a residence in Peru, Indiana, belonging to Tony Klein. Less than 2 weeks after the murders, a SWAT team raided the Klein home. During the ensuing interviews, Tony's son, Keegan Klein, admitted that he created the @AnthonyShots persona to catfish underage girls and solicit explicit photos and videos. Digital forensic examiners discovered a massive trove of child sexual abuse material, CSAM, on Keegan's confiscated devices. However, Keegan vehemently denied any involvement in the Delphi murders, claiming he and his father were in Las Vegas on the day of the killings. Authorities initially cleared him of the homicides, completely unaware that Keegan had managed to conceal the specific iPhone he used to communicate with Libby during the raid. That same night, Keegan frantically deleted his search history, Instagram, and Snapchat apps in a desperate attempt to erase his digital communications with the murdered teenager. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Delphi murders quickly brought 77-year-old Ronald Logan under intense scrutiny, as the bodies were discovered on his 40-acre property. Logan, who had lived on the land bordering Deer Creek for over 50 years, initially cooperated with authorities, granting search parties access to comb through his rugged property on the evening the girls were reported missing. However, his proximity to the crime scene and a questionable alibi made him an early focal point for the FBI and local police, prompting investigators to execute multiple search warrants on his home and land in February and March of 2017. While investigators searched the premises for forensic links to the murders, Logan was taken into custody for violating his probation stemming from a 2014 drunk driving conviction. He admitted to driving to a local waste transfer station on the day of the murders and was later spotted drinking beer at a pizza restaurant, both of which violated his court-mandated conditions. Despite the intense investigative spotlight, rumors of jailhouse confessions, and his eventual incarceration for the probation violations, law enforcement ultimately cleared Logan of any involvement in the homicides. With early persons of interest like Logan failing to yield definitive answers, investigators desperately needed to identify the suspect captured in Liberty German's smartphone video, leading to the creation of the first composite sketch of Bridge Guy. Released to the public on July 17, 2017, 5 months after the killings, the sketch was drawn by an FBI artist and compiled from the accounts of witnesses who had traversed the trails on the day of the murders. The creation of the composite was a painstaking process that took months to finalize, significantly delayed by the gradual pace at which witnesses came forward and the time required for investigators to verify and collate details between their differing statements. The resulting image depicted a Caucasian male between 5'6" and 5'10" tall, weighing 180 to 220 pounds, with reddish-brown hair. Witnesses described him as a middle-aged, heavy-set man wearing a hoodie and a flat newsboy-style cap, possessing a square face, a prominent bulbous nose, thin downturned lips, and eyes featuring a notable epicanthic fold. While one witness could not recall his exact eye color, she had come close enough to the suspect to be confident his eyes were not blue. Additionally, the sketch featured a neatly trimmed goatee or scruff, heavily influenced by witness Sarah Carbaugh's description of a stealthy middle-aged man she saw walking along the road. When unveiling the sketch, police cautioned that it was intended merely as a guide rather than a flawless representation of the killer. The release generated an immediate surge of public interest, bringing in 1,000 new tips within the first 24 hours, though it ultimately failed to produce an immediate identification of the murderer. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. In late September 2017, the Indiana State Police were contacted by a Colorado Sheriff's Department regarding a 31-year-old man named Daniel Nations, initiating one of the first highly publicized leads in the Delphi Murders investigation. On September 25th, Nations and his wife were pulled over by police in Colorado because their red Chevrolet Prism matched descriptions of a vehicle linked to a couple threatening passersby with a hatchet along a trail near Monument, Colorado. A search of the vehicle yielded a hatchet in the trunk and a .22 caliber rifle, and authorities soon noted that Nations was also suspected of being involved in the unsolved shooting death of mountain biker Timothy Watkins, which had occurred on that same trail just 2 weeks prior. As investigators dug into his background, several alarming parallels to the Delphi case emerged. Nations had an extensive criminal record that included domestic violence, petty offenses, and a conviction as a registered sex offender for indecent exposure in South Carolina. Most notably, Nations had ties to Indiana, claiming that he had been homeless and living underneath an Indiana State Road 67 bridge in Morgan County around the time the teen girls were murdered. Additionally, Nations bore a striking physical resemblance to the first composite sketch of the Delphi suspect, sharing facial features such as a goatee, short hair, wide-set eyes, a broad nose, and a thin mouth. Given these coincidences, Nations was officially declared a person of interest on September 28th, becoming the first named individual to hold that status in the case. The development had internet sleuths in full obsession mode, with many drawing side-by-side comparisons between Nations' mugshot and the composite sketch. The following day, detectives from Delphi flew to Colorado to interview Nations directly. During this process, law enforcement also obtained his DNA for forensic testing and further evaluation. Despite the intense public speculation, the investigation into Nations eventually hit a dead end. A critical detail working against his involvement in the Delphi murders was that on February 14, 2017, the day after the girls were killed, Nations had attended a mandatory, routine weekly checkup with Indiana authorities, a requirement stemming from his registered sex offender status, and he had been consistently attending these checkups prior to the murders. By December 2017, law enforcement clarified that while he was still a person of interest, he was no longer their top priority and was ultimately ruled out as a suspect in the double homicide. On January 5, 2018, Nations pleaded guilty to menacing in Colorado and was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, though he was never legally implicated in the Watkins murder. By the spring of 2019, the Delphi murder investigation had hit a lull, prompting First Sergeant Jerry Holman to seek outside guidance from consultants with the Sherry Black Foundation. Former Pennsylvania State Trooper Patrick Zerpeli and retired psychologist Richard Walter reviewed the case and concurred with federal profilers that the killer was a power-assertive predator obsessed with control. To flush the murderer out of hiding, the consultants advised law enforcement to publicly challenge him and push him into making a mistake. The resulting press conference was designed to have a single figurehead address the killer directly. Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter was chosen for his authentic and emotional speaking style, though the plan for a solo delivery was compromised by a backstage argument with Carroll County Sheriff Tobe Lazenby, who insisted on being present and ultimately stood silently over Carter's shoulder. On April 22, 2019, authorities officially announced a new direction in the case. During the briefing, Carter spoke directly to the perpetrator, famously warning him, "We believe you are hiding in plain sight," and suggesting that police had likely already interviewed him or someone close to him. In a bizarre, off-script moment, Carter even referenced the movie and book The Shack to suggest the killer's conscience might be tormenting him. More practically, investigators released a completely new composite sketch of a clean-shaven younger suspect, declaring the widely circulated 2017 sketch of an older man to now be considered secondary. To further aid the public, authorities released an extended audio clip where the suspect says, "Guys, down the hill," as well as a short snippet of Liberty German's video showing the man's gait as he walked across the Monon High Bridge. Finally, police requested information regarding a vehicle that had been abandoned near the former Child Services office on the day of the murders. The dramatic pivot had immediate and complicated consequences. Abigail Williams and Liberty German's families were informed of the new direction a mere 15 minutes before the rest of the world, leaving them feeling frustrated that had spent 2 years aggressively circulating a sketch that police were now tossing aside. Meanwhile, the press conference's confrontational rhetoric sent internet sleuths into a frenzy, with true crime obsessives dissecting Carter's speech as if every word contained a hidden code. This digital obsession quickly mutated into a sprawling, chaotic mob that scrutinized the victim's social media, picking apart the background of Liberty German's Snapchat photos and staring at the low-resolution image of the suspect until reality blurred into bizarre fiction. Web forums became flooded with absurd theories, with sleuths seriously debating whether the man on the bridge was carrying a puppy in his jacket, hiding a monkey on his back, or wearing a fanny pack equipped with an insulin pump. As the years dragged on without an arrest, the sleuths' fixations turned increasingly malicious, zeroing in on the victims' families and local law enforcement. Unable to muster sympathy for ordinary people enduring a tragedy, certain factions unilaterally decided that the girls' relatives were harboring dark secrets or were directly responsible for the murders. They weaponized minor misstatements made by the families during early media appearances and fabricated outright lies, such as falsely claiming the girls were pregnant or victims of familial abuse. When confronted with irrefutable proof that a rumored quote by Libby's grandmother on the Dr. Phil show never existed, the online community simply dismissed the facts and claimed the show's producers were part of a grand cover-up. This aggressive paranoia extended to the investigators. Online vigilantes accused Detective Tony Liggett of running a dogfighting ring, owning a sketchy massage parlor, and covering up for child killers, eventually stooping so low as to vandalize the Facebook memorial page of Liggett's late son. The consequences of this unfettered digital frenzy severely hindered the actual murder investigation. The official tip line was inundated with thousands of worthless messages from armchair detectives whose investigative expertise amounted to watching crime procedurals like CSI and Law and Order. These tipsters demanded that police utilize genetic genealogy, swab for DNA profiles, or inject the unidentified suspect with sodium pentothal, entirely ignoring the reality of the evidence available to law enforcement. Detectives were forced to waste precious time and resources chasing down vague sightings of men at Walmarts across the country and weeding out malicious tips filed by individuals attempting to use the murder investigation as a cudgel to settle personal scores, such as dodging child support payments. Because investigators could never be certain which tip might hold a genuine clue, they were legally and morally obligated to read through every nonsensical claim, including assertions that the girls had been abducted by Sasquatches or extraterrestrials. Ultimately, the unchecked speculation grew so destructive that police were forced to issue public warnings, pleading with internet sleuths to stop their reckless harassment and allow professionals to conduct the investigation without interference. The investigation into Keegan Kline sat dormant for years from 2017 until 2020, when a fresh digital forensic examination of his devices fully exposed the horrifying scope of his online predation. In August 2020, police arrested Keegan Kline on numerous charges of child exploitation and possession of CSAM. During a subsequent interrogation, detectives confronted Keegan about his suspicious internet searches regarding whether police could trace IP addresses from social media accounts. Investigators openly theorized that Keegan was protecting the real killer, possibly his own father, Tony Kline, who had a history of violence and stalking. But Keegan refused to budge, maintaining he had no knowledge of who murdered the girls. In December 2021, the Indiana State Police took the extraordinary step of releasing a public video detailing the deceptive Anthony Shots profile, asking any individuals who had interacted with the account to come forward. The public appeal generated immense media attention, but ultimately, despite his extensive catfishing network and vile crimes against children, investigators wouldn't find any definitive physical or digital evidence linking Keegan Kline or his father to the murders of Abby and Libby. Then, in a bizarre twist in late summer of 2022, an incarcerated Kline offered investigators what seemed to be a massive breakthrough in the Delphi Murders case. After initially floating a vague story that his father had drunkenly confessed to killing the girls and a man named Dougie, Keegan requested to be placed in witness protection. When detectives informed him that his story lacked the necessary details to justify such a deal, Keegan conferred with his attorney, Andrew Akey, and promised to provide a 100% factual account of the murders. On August 17, 2022, inside a room at the Grissom Air Reserve Base, Keegan sat down with Detective David Vito, a United States Marshal, Prosecutor Nicholas McClelland, and members of Unified Command to lay out his story. He claimed that on the afternoon of the killings, he and his father had driven to Delphi in a red Jeep so Tony could rendezvous with someone. According to Keegan, he waited patiently in the car until his father returned wearing blood-soaked clothing. As the two drove back home to Peru, Indiana, Keegan alleged that they slowed down over a bridge spanning the Wabash River, where Keegan chucked his own cell phone into the water and watched his father toss the murder weapon, a knife, into the greenish depths. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Investigators were thrilled to finally have a detailed narrative with specific elements they could either corroborate or debunk. But Keegan's story quickly began to unravel. Detectives secured the Kline's red Jeep and subjected it to a minute, rigorous examination, but they found absolutely no traces of blood. Furthermore, when police reviewed the traffic surveillance footage from the Hoosier Harvest Store camera near the trails, the highly conspicuous red Jeep never appeared. In a desperate bid to verify the timeline, First Sergeant Jerry Holman picked Keegan up and drove him to Delphi, so the suspect could provide step-by-step directions of their alleged route. Keegan's guided route would have taken the red Jeep directly past the surveillance camera, definitively proving to investigators that he was lying. Despite Holman's gut feeling that Keegan was leading law enforcement in circles, police knew they could not afford to leave the river lead unexplored. As the summer heat gave way to fall, an Indiana State Police dive team spent weeks wading through the knee-deep waters of the Wabash River, digging through the riverbed in search of the knife and phone. While the divers dredged up several discarded, rusted guns, none of which forensic examiner Melissa Oberg could link to the unspent cartridge found at the crime scene, they never recovered Keegan's phone or a murder weapon. Ultimately, authorities concluded that the confession was entirely fabricated, completely exhausting Keegan Kline's viability as a lead in the Delphi murders. He later pleaded guilty to his CSAM and exploitation charges, resulting in a 43-year prison sentence. On September 21, 2022, Kathy Shank arrived at the Unified Command headquarters with a desire to keep busy. A retiree and former case manager with Carroll County's Department of Child Services, Shank had volunteered her time to the Delphi murder investigation since its earliest days, initially working as a receptionist who greeted tipsters. However, September 21st was a particularly heavy day for her, as it marked the birthday of her late husband, Bill. Looking for a distraction, she immersed herself in her newly assigned task of organizing the investigation's sprawling, chaotic files. The headquarters had moved several times over the years, leaving folders scattered everywhere. But Shank's background in handling extensive child welfare paperwork made her perfectly suited to stack, label, and categorize the messy boxes into filing cabinets. As she flipped through the folders that afternoon, Shank came across a lead sheet that left her thoroughly confused. The document detailed a 2017 interview conducted by Department of Natural Resources Lieutenant Dan Doolin. According to the sheet, Doolin had spoken with a Delphi resident identified as Richard Allen Whiteman, who reported being on the trails on February 13, 2017, between 1:30 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. The man noted that he had seen 3 girls during his walk, specifically describing one as having dark hair. Inexplicably, this highly significant tip had been officially marked as cleared. Shank had spent years volunteering for Unified Command, memorizing the timelines, the names of all the witnesses, and the intricate flowchart that tracked the movements of every known person on the trails that day. She immediately realized that no one named Whiteman or Allen was on that chart. Furthermore, as a longtime resident of the area, Shank recognized that Whiteman was the name of a local road, making it highly likely the name on the sheet was incorrect. What truly alarmed her, however, was the man's description of the 3 girls. Shank knew that a real group of 3 girls, Rayleigh Voorhees, Brianne Wilbur, and Anna Spath, had been walking the trails at that exact time, and they were the crucial witnesses who had encountered and been glared at by the suspect, known as Bridge Guy. If this mysterious man had seen those girls, it meant he was on the trails at the exact same time they were, making it incredibly likely that he was the Bridge Guy himself. Toward the end of the day, Shank brought the perplexing tip sheet to Detective Tony Liggett, who was the only investigator in the office at the time. When she handed it to him and asked if he knew about it, Liggett initially assumed they had already covered it, but Shank pushed him to look closer. As Liggett read the details, recognizing the mention of the 3 girls, he froze. The 2 of them remained frozen in shock for a moment as the magnitude of the discovery set in. Liggett quickly logged into the FBI's Orion Crisis Management database to pull up the tip narrative, then immediately called the prosecutor's investigator, Steve Mullen, telling him, "I think we found Bridge Guy." The breakthrough revealed a devastating clerical error from the chaotic early days of the investigation. When Richard Allen initially called the tip line in 2017, a volunteer dispatcher had mistakenly swapped his last name with the street he lived on, filing the tip under the false name Richard Allen Whiteman. Although Lieutenant Doolin had noticed the error and corrected the name in his own notes during their subsequent parking lot interview, the lead sheet was somehow filed as cleared and became buried under thousands of useless tips. It took Kathy Shank's meticulous organizing and deep institutional knowledge of the case to finally unearth the misfiled document, breaking the 5-year mystery wide open in a single afternoon. Upon hearing the news, prosecutor Nicholas McClellan agreed that the description matched their suspect, but cautioned the team to avoid jumping to conclusions, noting they still lacked the fresh probable cause necessary to move forward. Mullen quickly reached out to Department of Natural Resources Lieutenant Dan Doolin to ask if the name Allen meant anything to him. After checking the DNR's point-of-sale system, Doolin located fishing licenses for Richard and Kathy Allen, noting a bizarre discrepancy where Allen's reported height had inexplicably jumped from 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 6 inches just weeks after the murders. When Mullen explained Shank's discovery, Doolin's memory was immediately dragged back to that brief, long-forgotten parking lot interview from 2017. As twilight approached, Liggett dialed First Sergeant Jerry Holman, who had taken the evening off and was sitting on his tractor watching brush burn on his property. Liggett enthusiastically repeated his conviction that they had finally found Bridge Guy, speaking faster than usual as he recounted Shank's findings. Holman urged Liggett to calm down, and the two agreed to run Richard Allen's name through the Indiana Intelligence Fusion Center to pull a comprehensive background check, including his vehicles, residence, employment, and family history. An Indiana State Police intelligence analyst promptly returned a trove of records, prompting Holman to begin notifying the rest of the team. Holman drove directly to the home of Trooper David Vito, who had taken some time off to recover from the grueling toll of the investigation. Finding Vito in his front yard laying down sod, Holman delivered the news, sending Vito into a wave of shock. Eager to rush back to the command center, but needing to finish his yard work before the sod rotted, Vito received unexpected help when Holman grabbed a tractor to till the dirt, allowing the detective to quickly drop his time off and return to the case. When Unified Command finally convened to review the analysts' findings, they realized the devastating magnitude of the 2017 clerical error that had buried the lead under a false street name. Liggett, who had historically played the devil's advocate against almost every other case theory, found himself fiercely defending the lead as the others attempted to poke holes in it. The team pulled Bureau of Motor Vehicles records, confirming that in 2017, Allen drove a black 2016 Ford Focus Special Edition. Mullen then pulled up the traffic surveillance footage from the Hoosier Harvestor camera, where they watched a black Ford Focus zoom across the screen at 1:27 p.m., aligning perfectly with the timeline Allen had provided to Doolin. Desperate to verify that the vehicle on camera was definitively Allen's, the investigators scrutinized the footage and noticed that the car's tire rims were unusual for a Ford Focus, allowing light to stream through them. Liggett immediately drove his unmarked black Ford truck to the local CVS parking lot where Allen worked. Circling the mostly empty lot, Liggett located Allen's Ford Focus, pulled out his phone, and photographed the tires. The pictures confirmed that sunlight shone through Allen's rims in the exact same manner as the car in the video. With the evidence stacking up, the investigators called McClellan again. While the prosecutor agreed the developments were highly promising, he informed them that the 2017 tip was legally stale. To secure a search warrant for Allen's property, they would have to bring the suspect in for a fresh interview. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On Thursday, October 13th, 2022, former Delphi Police Chief Steve Mullen and Detective Tony Liggett drove to Richard Allen's home on Whiteman Drive, presenting themselves under the guise of conducting a routine check-in on a forgotten witness. Allen appeared mildly surprised but cooperative. After smoking a cigarette in his garage, he willingly rode to the Unified Command headquarters in Mullen's unmarked Buick. Inside the stark interview room, Mullen took the lead with his characteristically mild-mannered approach, while Liggett observed. Meanwhile, in a back room, a group of investigators, including Jerry Holman and David Vito, watched the feed via closed-circuit television. As soon as Allen began to speak, the observing detectives were struck by how his voice perfectly matched the chilling, down the hill audio recording. The interview began with friendly banter as Allen chatted breezily about his family, his health issues, and his work history. However, when the conversation shifted to the day of the murders, Allen altered his original timeline, now claiming he had visited the trails between noon and 1 p.m. to watch fish and check stock prices. He admitted to wearing an outfit that perfectly matched the bridge guy suspect: blue jeans, a dark Carhartt jacket, and a skull cap. Under Mullen's gentle prodding, Allen also conceded that he might have driven the country route that day, a path that would have taken his Ford Focus directly past the Hoosier Harvestor surveillance camera. Unbeknownst to Allen, investigators had simultaneously dispatched officers to interview his family members, successfully learning from his wife Kathy that Allen owned a .40 caliber handgun, knives, and a blue Carhartt jacket. The tenor of the interview shifted dramatically when Mullen and Liggett asked for permission to extract data from Allen's phone and search his home. Realizing he was a suspect, Allen balked, declaring that he was not going to be somebody's fall guy. When the investigators presented him with a photograph of the suspect on the bridge, Allen laughed and firmly denied it was him. Furious that police had questioned his wife behind his back, Allen abruptly ended the interview, called Mullen an asshole, and stormed out of the building, ignoring pleas from Detective Vito to continue talking. Despite his angry departure, the interview was a massive success for the investigation. Allen had unknowingly refreshed the stale 2017 tip by confirming he was on the bridge, dressed identically to the killer, and driving the suspect vehicle. This fresh information provided the definitive probable cause needed to move forward. Prosecutor Nicholas McClelland worked with the detectives to draft a search warrant affidavit, which was quickly signed by a judge. By 5 p.m. that very same afternoon, an army of armed law enforcement officers descended upon Richard Allen's brick home on Whiteman Drive to execute the warrant. The suspect waited outside the home in a vehicle while Indiana State Police Detective David Vito led the search inside. Sitting in the dark and smoking cigarettes, Allen made a series of ominous comments to supervising investigator Jerry Holman, repeatedly muttering, "It doesn't matter, it's over," and complaining that the damage is done because his neighbors and co-workers were watching his life unravel. Inside the home, investigators carefully cataloged what prosecutors would later call the Bridge Guy Starter Kit. In the closets, troopers recovered dirty boots, skull caps, 10 pairs of gloves, and a blue Carhartt jacket that closely matched the attire of the suspect captured in Liberty German's video. Spread throughout the garage, kitchen, and master bedroom, investigators found at least 4 box cutters and nearly 30 knives, ranging from fillet and folding knives to multi-tools and a small katana. A plastic bag yielded 17 old cell phones, though the specific device Allen had used in 2017 was notably missing. Detectives also found a photo album dating back to 2008 that contained pictures of Allen and his family along the Delphi trails, proving his extensive familiarity with the remote area near the Monon High Bridge and Deer Creek. The most damning discoveries, however, were found in the master bedroom. Inside Allen's nightstand, police seized a loaded black .40 caliber Sig Sauer P226 pistol. As the search continued, a United States Marshal and Detective Vito opened a wooden keepsake box, or hope box, tucked within that same nightstand. Nestled among military photos, patches, coins, and a letter from Allen's mother lay a single unspent .40 caliber Smith & Wesson Winchester cartridge. The seized evidence was immediately hand-delivered to the Indiana State Police Laboratory in Indianapolis, where forensic firearms examiner Melissa Oberg compared Allen's weapon to the unspent .40 caliber round that had been discovered in the dirt between the bodies of Abby and Libby. After test firing the Sig Sauer, Oberg determined under a microscope that the cartridge from the crime scene had been cycled through Allen's specific gun, leaving behind matching, distinct extraction and ejection marks. Armed with this definitive ballistic match, Allen's admission that he was on the bridge wearing the suspect's clothing, and surveillance footage of his Ford Focus near the trails, investigators brought him back to the Lafayette Police Post for another interview on October 26, 2022. During a heated, profanity-laced interrogation with Holman, Allen repeatedly denied any involvement in the murders and insisted the crime scene bullet was not his. Eventually, a defiant Allen balled his hands into fists, held out his wrists, and told Holman, "I'm done talking. Arrest me." Holman obliged, taking Allen into custody and formally charging him with the double homicide of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. A few days after formal charges were filed against Richard Allen, members of Unified Command gathered on stage at the Delphi United Methodist Church to officially announce the long-awaited arrest to an expectant press. The highly anticipated event was fraught with tension, largely because prosecutor Nicholas McClelland had made the controversial decision to seal the probable cause affidavit, meaning authorities could not publicly explain the evidence that led to the arrest or why they felt confident they had the right man. Behind the scenes of the momentous announcement, a minor clash occurred when Julie Melvin, an internet sleuth who had previously antagonized the victims' families, appeared at the church. Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, asked investigator Jerry Holman to inform Melvin that the family did not want her present, but Melvin stubbornly remained, reasoning that leaving would be allowing the devil and his demons to win. When the authorities finally addressed the public, Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter delivered the monumental news, declaring, "I am proud to report to you that today, actually last Friday, was the day." However, he was quick to temper the mood, reminding those in attendance that today is not a day to celebrate, as the prosecution was only just beginning, leaving the door open for future developments, warning that the case was still active. "We are going to continue a very methodical and committed approach to ensure that if any other person had any involvement in these murders in any way, that person or persons will be held accountable," he stated. Ultimately, while the announcement of Allen's arrest was an earth-shifting development for the Delphi community, the press conference made it abundantly clear that the public would remain in the dark regarding the specific details and evidence of the case. Following his arrest in October 2022, Carroll County Sheriff Tobe Lazenby faced a significant logistical and security problem regarding where to house Richard Allen. The local county jail was small, equipped with only 34 beds, and frequently overcrowded. Fearing the sheriff's office lacked the resources to guarantee the safety of a man accused of murdering 2 children amidst intense national media scrutiny, Lazenby formally requested that the court transfer Allen to the Indiana Department of Correction. On November 3, 2022, Judge Benjamin Diener approved the request, moving Allen to a secure cell in the maximum security Westville Correctional Facility. However, the judge accompanied this routine legal order with a bizarre 2-page rant condemning the public's bloodlust for information and complaining about underpaid public servants, immediately before abruptly recusing himself from the case. The Indiana Supreme Court swiftly appointed Special Judge Francis Gull to take his place. Meanwhile, Carroll County Prosecutor Nicholas McClelland faced intense public criticism for his decision to seal the probable cause affidavit detailing the evidence against Allen. McClelland had sealed the document out of concern that other actors might be involved in the crime, and that releasing information could lead to the destruction of evidence or witness intimidation. However, on November 29, 2022, Judge Gull ordered the unsealing of the redacted probable cause affidavit. The document publicly laid bare the chilling clues that led to the arrest. An unspent .40 caliber round found between the victims' bodies had been cycled through Alan's pistol. Smartphone video showed a man matching Alan's description ordering the girls down the hill, and Alan's own admission to being on the trail that day, dressed in clothing identical to the killer. Inside the Westville Correctional Facility, Alan was placed in a highly restrictive solitary confinement cell where he was constantly monitored by guards, cameras, and suicide companions. Over the months, the isolation took a severe toll on his mental and physical health. His defense attorneys would later claim the conditions were akin to those of a prisoner of war, describing Alan as losing 40 pounds, banging his head against his cell door until he was bruised, slipping into acute psychosis, and engaging in severe delirium that included eating his own feces and drinking from the toilet. Amid this deteriorating mental state, Alan purportedly found God in March 2023, deciding he needed to take full responsibility for his sins in order to be reunited with his family in heaven. He began confessing to the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German to virtually anyone who would listen, starting with a note sent to the prison warden expressing a desire to confess and apologize to the victims' families. Ultimately, prosecutors documented over 60 confessions made to the prison warden, correctional officers, suicide companions, his mother, his wife, and the prison's lead psychologist, Dr. Monica Walla. Alan also repeatedly confessed to his wife, Kathy, and his mother, Janice, in recorded prison phone calls, stating plainly, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." Rather than accepting his admissions, his family fiercely rejected them, crying and insisting that he was innocent, and that prison staff must be tampering with his medication or intentionally messing with his mind. Alan's defense attorneys echoed this sentiment throughout the legal proceedings, arguing that the confessions were entirely unreliable. The involuntary ravings of a broken man suffering from a severe mental health crisis, brought on by the grueling psychological torture of solitary confinement. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Richard Allen grew up in the tiny community of Mexico, Indiana, situated within Miami County. Raised by parents who were not churchgoers, he spent his youth running track and playing football in school. Shortly after graduating high school, he left for basic training with the National Guard and quickly married his high school sweetheart, Kathy, who hailed from nearby Peru. The couple eventually settled in Delphi, raising their daughter Brittany in a small, sand-colored brick home on Whiteman Drive. Allen took courses at Ivy Tech and built a long career in retail management, spending a decade at Walmart before transitioning to a shift manager position at the local CVS. To many, he lived a quiet, unassuming small-town life, occasionally playing pool at JC's Bar and Grill, hanging out in his garage, or sitting in his driveway drinking beer as twilight fell. Beneath this ordinary exterior, however, Allen was a deeply fragile man, plagued by severe physical and mental health issues, a combination of inadequacies and resentments that may have helped shape the dark impulses that led to the murders. He suffered from high blood pressure, cholesterol, and a heart attack in 2010 that required stents, alongside chronic depression and anxiety. Allen struggled intensely with the pressures of his retail jobs. His promotions to leadership roles rarely lasted long before the stress of decision-making and his obsession with others' opinions completely overwhelmed him. He would sometimes come home from work so defeated that he curled up in a fetal position on the floor, relying entirely on his wife and his mother, Janice, to soothe him and build him back up. This profound emotional fragility occasionally erupted into terrifying outbursts of anger and violence, including an incident where he jammed a gun into his mouth and threatened suicide in front of his wife and daughter. Within this turbulent mental state, a more sinister and deviant profile began to take shape. While some CVS employees found him to be an unobtrusive but controlling micromanager, His former colleagues at Walmart remembered him differently, describing him as a leering creep, oozing desperation, before he flamed out of his leadership role there in 2013. In his private digital life, Allen fed a macabre obsession with control, captivity, and degradation. On computers linked to his personal email, he actively searched for the darkest and most fucked up films on Netflix, specifically seeking out movies about teenagers taking men prisoner and the best kidnapping and hostage movies ever made. He also consumed bizarre pornography featuring elderly women defecating and made internet searches regarding existential, suicidal questions like, "Should I die now?" Years later, while incarcerated, Allen would also claim that his childhood had been tainted by sexual abuse, alleging he was molested by his grandfather and raped by a babysitter when he was 11 years old. These dark fixations and persistent feelings of powerlessness aligned seamlessly with the behavioral profile of a power-assertive predator who sought to claim ultimate control through kidnapping, humiliation, and violence. The grim motive finally materialized into action on the unseasonably warm afternoon of February 13, 2017. According to a detailed confession he later provided to prison psychologist Dr. Monica Walla, Allen drank 3 beers that morning before heading to the Delphi trails, armed with his .40 caliber Sig Sauer pistol. He admitted that his explicit intention that day was to lie in wait, stalk a woman, kidnap her, and rape her. When he spotted 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German, he decided they would be his targets, pulling his gun and forcing the terrified teenagers down the hill to satisfy his violent urges. However, after he had the girls under his control in the woods, Allen spotted a white van passing on a nearby access road. Panicked and terrified of being caught, he abandoned his original plan to rape them, slashed the girls' throats with a stolen CVS box cutter to silence them, and fled back to his seemingly ordinary life. In August 2023, the tight seal protecting the gruesome evidence of the Delphi murders was shattered from inside the defense's own headquarters. Mitch Westerman, a former operations manager for the criminal defense team and a close personal friend of attorney Andrew Baldwin, visited Baldwin's office in Franklin, Indiana. While waiting in a conference room, Westerman noticed printed crime scene photographs and unreleased suspect sketches spread across a large wooden table. Pulling out his smartphone, he took pictures of the highly sensitive discovery materials and subsequently shared them with a military friend named Robert Fortson. Fortson, an Air National Guard member with an obsessive interest in the Delphi case, used his perceived insider status to pass the horrific images along to other online true crime fanatics. By late September, Fortson was regularly communicating with Mark Robert Cohen, a Texas-based tattoo artist he had met in Delphi-focused Facebook and Reddit groups. Fortson sent Cohen a photograph of a blood-smeared tree from the crime scene, followed by images of the girls' bodies. The leak erupted into public view when Cohen posted the bloody tree photo to his personal Facebook page in early October, and the images of the bodies began circulating among various podcasters and YouTubers. The unauthorized release of the materials threw the investigation and the legal proceedings into absolute chaos. Prosecutor Nicholas McClelland and lead investigator Jerry Holman scrambled to identify the source of the leak, an exhausting ordeal that consumed precious investigative time and resources. When the trail finally led back to Baldwin's office, Judge Frances Gull was furious, summoning the attorneys to her chambers and accusing the defense team of gross negligence and incompetence in their handling of discovery. The scandal culminated in a dramatic October hearing where Baldwin and his co-counsel Brad Rozzi were disqualified and removed from the case, severely delaying the trial timeline. The fallout also took a tragic human toll. On October 11th, shortly after police began questioning him about his role in the leak, Robert Fortson died by suicide with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. For his role in the initial breach, Westerman faced a misdemeanor criminal charge, and his marriage ended in divorce over the scandal. For the families of Liberty German and Abigail Williams, the leak was a devastating and deeply personal violation. The relatives were forced to endure the agonizing reality that images of their murdered children were being traded, analyzed, and discussed by morbidly curious internet sleuths. Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, viewed the leak as a profound insult to her modest granddaughter's memory and privacy. The nightmare became inescapable when a notoriously persistent internet troll from the Netherlands bypassed bans to email the leaked crime scene pictures directly to Becky. Opening the message while on vacation, she was forced to view the horrific image of her granddaughter lying naked and dead amid the forest leaves. Bound by a court-ordered gag order throughout the ordeal, the grieving families had to suffer this immense indignity in complete silence. On September 18, 2023, defense attorneys Brad Rozzi and Andrew Baldwin filed a 136-page Franks memorandum that radically altered the trajectory of the Delphi Murders case. Ostensibly intended to request a hearing over allegations that police lied to obtain the search warrant for Richard Allen's home, the document metamorphosed into a sprawling, sensational presentation of the defense's overarching theory. Baldwin had worked on the document for months, sharing drafts with colleagues, and leveraging a recent decision by Judge Francis Gull to unseal court records as an opportunity to reshape the public narrative. The memorandum contended that Liberty German and Abigail Williams were not murdered by Allen, but were instead ritually sacrificed by a violent white supremacist prison gang known as Odinists. However, the defense offered no proof of Odinist involvement and conflated distinct Norse pagan practices, baselessly accusing Westville correctional officers of participating in a vast conspiracy based on ambiguous patches worn on their uniforms. The filing also twisted the words of academic expert Jeffrey Turco and devolved into outright fantasy, notably claiming guards threatened to kill Allen's family if he did not confess, only to admit in a footnote that Allen had never actually made such an allegation. Much to the distress of the victims' families, the document included highly detailed, graphic descriptions of the crime scene and how the girls died. The defense pointed to sticks left on the girls and a smear of blood on a nearby tree, claiming these were painstakingly crafted Odinist runes. Throughout the 136 pages, the attorneys relentlessly attacked investigators, particularly Tony Liggett, accusing them of lying and behaving recklessly, while showering praise on Todd Click and his task force colleagues. Baldwin anticipated the memorandum would land like an atomic bomb, dreaming it would spark public outrage and secure Allen's freedom, but the resulting firestorm proved far more chaotic. Instead of a nationwide demand for Allen's release, the document ignited a frenzy of online speculation and scrutiny. It even alienated Click, the very investigator the defense praised. Click publicly denounced the ritual sacrifice theory as the defense twisting facts for sensationalism. The intense focus on the alleged runes and the bloody tree ultimately primed the internet for the catastrophic leak of sensitive crime scene photographs, which began circulating shortly after the memorandum's release, when an associate of Baldwin's shared them with an online sleuth. The fallout from that massive evidence leak resulted in Judge Gull removing Rozzi and Baldwin from the case, citing gross negligence and incompetence. However, the defense attorneys refused to back down, enlisting appellate lawyers Mark Lehman and Kara Wienicke to file an original action with the Indiana Supreme Court. They argued that no Indiana court had ever tolerated a trial judge removing an attorney over a client's objection based on a subjective belief of negligence, demanding that Rozzi and Baldwin be reinstated and that Judge Gull be removed to avoid the appearance of bias. On January 18, 2024, the legal battle culminated in a one-hour oral argument before the Indiana Supreme Court inside the State House. Just hours after the hearing concluded, the state's highest court issued its decision. Judge Gull would remain on the bench, but Baldwin and Rozzi were officially reinstated as Richard Allen's defense counsel. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On October 14, 2024, the highly anticipated murder trial of Richard Allen commenced with jury selection in Allen County, Indiana, drawing prospective jurors into a sprawling narrative of horror, tragedy, and convoluted legal battles. Following a brisk selection process that wrapped up a day early, the 16 selected jurors and alternates were ferried to Carroll County, where they were sequestered in a local hotel, ripped from their daily lives to decide the fate of the man accused of slaughtering 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German. The trial opened with starkly contrasting statements from the prosecution and defense. Prosecutor Nicholas McClellan delivered a forceful, concise opening that urged the jury to focus on three core elements: Bridge Guy, an unspent bullet, and the brutal murders of the two teenage best friends. Despite a malfunctioning courtroom television that briefly derailed his presentation of drone footage, McClellan commanded the room, casting the jury into the terrified minds of the victims as they encountered their killer on the Monon High Bridge. The evidence will show that the last face the girls saw before their throats were slit was Richard Allen's face, he declared. Conversely, defense attorney Andrew Baldwin presented a long, rambling, and emotionally overwrought opening statement, jumping erratically between topics. Baldwin asserted that Allen's numerous confessions were entirely false, claimed the state's timeline was broken, and teased the jury with the revelation that hairs found on Abby did not belong to Allen, a fact that, while true, was forensically insignificant as the hair belonged to Libby's sister, Kelsi. Baldwin pleaded with the jury to keep an open mind, insisting his client was a truly innocent man who had been tortured into false confessions by the horrific conditions of his incarceration. The prosecution's case-in-chief began with heart-wrenching testimony from the girls' families, deliberately humanizing the victims before delving into the grim details of their deaths. Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, and Abby's mother, Anna Williams, shared tearful recollections of the girls, painting a picture of two inseparable, vibrant teenagers. The state then methodically built its circumstantial case. 4 young women, Rayleigh Voorhees, Brianne Wilbur, and Betsy Blair, among others, testified to seeing a creepy, glaring man in a blue jacket walking the trails with purpose that afternoon, all identifying him as the bridge guy captured in Libby's video. The state's forensic and medical experts delivered devastating blows to the defense's overarching theories. Forensic pathologist Dr. Roland Kaur testified that the girls' throats had been cut with a serrated-like blade, revealing that a box cutter, the exact weapon Allen claimed to have stolen from CVS to commit the murders, could account for the horrific injuries. Major Pat Cicero, a crime scene expert, methodically walked the jury through the bloody forest floor, effectively destroying the defense's heavily publicized theory that a group of Odinists had painted a runic symbol on a tree using Libby's blood. Cicero explained that the marking was actually a transfer stain consistent with the shape of Libby's bloody handprint, left as the dying girl staggered and sought support against the bark. State Police firearms examiner Melissa Oberg testified that an unspent .40 caliber cartridge found lying between the girls' bodies possessed extraction and ejection marks that sufficiently matched Allen's Sig Sauer pistol, tying the defendant directly to the crime scene. The most damning evidence against Allen came from his own mouth. Indiana State Police Master Trooper Brian Harshman guided the jury through a series of recorded jailhouse phone calls in which Allen repeatedly and calmly confessed to his wife Kathy and his mother Janice, stating simply, "I did it." The jury listened as his family fiercely rejected his admissions, insisting his medications were being tampered with, while a desperate Allen begged them to love him despite his monstrous actions. Prison psychologist Dr. Monica Walla testified that Allen provided her with a highly detailed account of the crime, admitting he drank 3 beers, went to the trails armed with his gun to stalk and rape a woman, but targeted the girls instead. Crucially, Allen told Walla he was spooked by a white van passing on a nearby access road, a detail only the killer could know, which prosecutors corroborated by calling Brad Weber, who testified he drove his white van under the bridge at the exact time of the abduction. When the defense took over, their theory of the crime emerged piecemeal and strained credulity. Stripped of their Odinist cult narrative by the judge, the defense attorneys implicitly argued that the girls had been kidnapped, held captive in an unknown location for 14 hours without fighting back, and then returned to the heavily searched woods in the dead of night to be murdered. They called witnesses who were on the trails well after the murders occurred to testify that they saw nothing, and individuals who spotted nondescript cars miles away. Their attempt to frame Allen's confessions as the delusions of a man driven mad by solitary confinement backfired when their own expert, Dr. Deanna Dwenger, admitted under cross-examination that Allen's claims of murder did not fit the clinical presentation of any classic psychotic delusions. The defense's firearms expert, Dr. Eric Warren, testified that the cartridge did not match Allen's gun, but prosecutor James Luttrell severely damaged his credibility by highlighting that Warren had based his conclusions entirely on photographs rather than examining the physical evidence under a microscope. Even Allen's own daughter, Brittany Zapanta, appeared deeply uncomfortable on the stand, refusing to make eye contact with her father as she testified. The trial concluded with fiery closing arguments. Defense attorney Brad Rozzi delivered a rambling, disjointed closing that jumped from bungled ballistics to criticizing the digital forensics, ultimately culminating in a bizarre appeal for jury nullification. Displaying images of medieval torture devices like the rack and thumbscrews and a snake representing the power of the government, Rozzi compared Allen's prison conditions to torture and urged the jury to push back against the state's overreach, suggesting that no man should be treated like that, whether guilty or not. In his rebuttal, McClellan dismantled the defense's conspiracy theories and reminded the jury of the Bridge Guy starter kit found in Allen's home: the Carhartt jacket, the boots, the knives, the box cutters, and the gun that cycled the cartridge left at the scene. Fighting back tears, McClellan refocused the courtroom on the victims, framing them not merely as casualties, but as the heroes who solved their own murders. Libby was a hero for shooting a video of Allen. Abby was a hero for concealing the phone beneath her body, he told the jury, reminding them that Libby's childhood dream was to help police solve crimes. The jury deliberated through the weekend, meticulously reviewing the timeline, the confessions, and the video evidence. Following a day of rest on Sunday, they returned on Monday, November 11, 2024, and swiftly reached a unanimous consensus. As the verdict was read, finding Richard Allen guilty on all counts of murder, the courtroom erupted in a mix of profound relief and sorrow. The families of the victims wept, embracing the prosecutors and investigators who had fought for 7 years to secure justice. Through it all, the convicted killer remained entirely expressionless, his face void of any emotion, as the transport team snapped handcuffs onto his wrists at 2:32 p.m., the exact time Libby German's phone had stopped moving forever. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. The legal proceedings reached their crescendo on December 20th, 2024, when Special Judge Francis Gull sentenced Allen to the maximum penalty of 130 years in prison, ensuring the 52-year-old would spend the rest of his life behind bars. During the brief, emotionally charged hearing, Judge Gull condemned Allen for the carnage he inflicted and admonished him for rolling his eyes at her throughout the trial, calling the murders among the most heinous she had seen in her 27-year career. The conclusion of the sentencing also brought the end of a strict judicial gag order, finally unmuzzling investigators and the victims' families. Authorities held a press conference to thank the community and investigators, giving special recognition to Kathy Schenk, the volunteer clerk who discovered the misfiled tip that cracked the case. The victims' families also took the opportunity to express their immense grief and gratitude, with Libby's grandfather, Mike Patty, declaring that justice had been served, while Libby's mother, Carrie Timmons, shared how incredibly proud she was of her daughter for having the courage to expose her killer. Despite the decisive verdict, the aftermath of the trial was marked by the defense team's continued defiance and bizarre behavior. As they marched down the courthouse steps, Allen's wife, Kathy, accompanied by a YouTuber, declared to the media, "This isn't over at all." In the weeks following the conviction, defense attorneys Bradley Rozzi and Andrew Baldwin embarked on media interviews to downplay their own leak of graphic crime scene photos, and their law firm controversially gifted an investigator a framed photo of the Monon High Bridge at a Christmas party, joking about a second trial. In a desperate bid for exoneration, the defense pinned their hopes on a convicted meth dealer named Richie Davis, who claimed that former suspect Ron Logan and Keegan Kline had confessed to the murders, but the letters Davis wrote to the prosecutor actually implicated Richard Allen and accused defense attorney Baldwin of suborning perjury. Due to the immense national spotlight and security concerns surrounding the high-profile convict, Allen was transferred out of Indiana's Pendleton Correctional Facility on July 18, 2025, under an interstate compact agreement. He was relocated to the Lexington Assessment and Reception Center, a high-security prison in Oklahoma. As of May 2026, the future of Allen's legal battle hinges on an upcoming appeal. The Indiana Court of Appeals has scheduled oral arguments for September 21, 2026, where Allen's appellate attorneys plan to argue that the search warrant for his home was based on deliberate falsehoods, that his numerous jailhouse confessions were the involuntary result of solitary confinement, and that the trial court unjustly excluded their theory that the girls were sacrificed by an Odinist white nationalist cult. The Delphi murders have left a dark and complex legacy regarding the modern phenomenon of internet sleuthing culture. While the intense public interest generated necessary tips and a massive reward fund, it also bred an uncontrolled wave of amateur detectives who treated the horrific crime like a crowdsourced puzzle. Innocent locals were baselessly accused and harassed, conspiracy theories about police cover-ups ran rampant, and the victims' own family members were subjected to vile online accusations. Even after the conviction, a vocal faction of conspiracy theorists and YouTubers remained devoted to Allen's innocence, harassing court officials and journalists while elevating the defense attorneys to celebrity status. The case now serves as a grim cautionary tale for law enforcement navigating the double-edged sword of social media, illustrating how public fascination can spiral into toxic misinformation. Yet, the true and lasting legacy of the Delphi murders belongs to the community's resilience and the innocent, wholesome friendship between Abby and Libby. The girls were exceptionally close, bonding over middle school band, softball, photography, and a shared love for the outdoors. They were ambitious, kind-hearted teenagers with bright futures. Abby aspired to a career in law enforcement, while Libby dreamed of being a science teacher. In the face of unimaginable terror on the Monon High Bridge, the girls stuck together. Their bravery directly secured the evidence necessary to eventually capture Richard Allen. Rather than letting the darkness of the crime define their town, Delphi residents and the girls' families channeled their heartbreak into creating the Abby and Libby Memorial Park. Featuring softball fields, playgrounds, an amphitheater, and a walking trail, the park ensures that the enduring memory of Abigail Williams and Liberty German will forever be tied to the joy, nature, and playfulness that defined their beautiful friendship.